All right, continuing on with Chapter 1. This is going to cover Sections 5 and 6 of your notes. So we're going to go ahead and get underway with the elements of programming. The various strategies for selecting, scheduling, promoting, and evaluating programs are derived from a set of assumptions about audience behavior. Now, that's a very nice, eloquent way of saying that we profile people. We tend to put people from various demographics and various other types of profiles that we create from people based on their niche interests and tastes, their beliefs, their attitudes, their values. And we try to put them into these certain groups that we try to understand what it is that they're about, their beliefs, their attitudes, their values, what it is they want out of media content, and we try to develop programming based on those assumptions that we make. So as we're going into the idea of programming and what makes up programming, what are the elements that are involved? There's 5 major groups that we're going to talk about here. The first major group is compatibility. Now, within compatibility, programmers strive to make their programming compatible with the day's round of what most people do. So in other words, it's trying to match up the scheduling of various programs based on where their audience is at, whether they're available to consume the content, how they're consuming the content, in what manner. Think about early news, for example. A lot of people will turn on the TV news in the morning as they're cooking breakfast, getting the kids off to school, getting ready for work, so they may not necessarily be watching the TV. So the people in responsibility of putting the news broadcast together is going to make it so that people that are listening can pay attention and consume the content just as much as those that are sitting and actually watching. Day parting is scheduling different types of programs to match parts of the day. So you're going to have various types of programs within the early fringe time period, the prime time period. In radio, we talk about drive time, morning drive, afternoon drive, and that's going to be chunks of time out of the broadcast day in which we consider that particular time period to be for a particular type of programming content. Advertising income from infomercials, which is program length commercials, air at times of the day when the audience size is too small to attract mainstream advertisers and not large enough to generate viewer complaints that the usual shows are missing. So this is why you see a lot of infomercials during the overnight hours, during early morning hours on Saturdays and Sundays, and sometimes in the middle of the afternoon on the weekends if like there's not a sports broadcast or something going on. Generally, they're going to be at times when there's not a huge number of the target audience that would be tuning in to that TV or radio station, and it's a way for the media outlets to try to earn a little bit of revenue at times where they might not be able to bring in normal advertising dollars. So we've talked about compatibility. Now, here's another group, habit formation. Scheduling programs for strict predictability, establishing tuning habits that eventually become automatic. Now, here's what we're talking about here. We are creatures of habits. We tend to do things the same way at the same times with the same kind of just automatic reflex processes, whether it's we get up, we do our morning routine, our eating, our preparing ourselves for the day, whatever else may be going on. But it's also true of the way that we consume media. We have certain habits. We turn on the TV or the radio at certain times of the day, or when we're doing certain types of activities. or when we do tune in, we tune in to particular channels to consume particular types of content, and we behave in particular ways when we do those things. So habit formation very much in the minds of programmers when they're scheduling content for us. Habit formation calls for stripping programs, or striping programs if you prefer, scheduling them at the same time each day. This plays into habit formation in that if you as a consumer of content knows that your favorite show is on every Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, then you're going to make it a point that you go and you are in front of a television on Tuesday night at 9 o'clock. Or locally, the game shows Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy are on every weeknight. Jeopardy at 7 o'clock and Wheel of Fortune at 7:30. Then you are going to make it a point, as best as you are able to catch those programs when you're in front of a TV at 7 o'clock, Monday through Friday night. Broadcast TV generally strips off network programming that has at least 4 seasons of content in addition to syndicated programming, and that's basically so that they have enough content that they can provide a decent amount of variety of programming during that Monday through Friday time slot in particular. Many cable networks will strip programming over a longer period of time each day. You know, it's not unusual to tune in to a cable network and see 3 or 4 hours of the same type of broadcast or the same particular program over that period of time. These, like a mini marathon, if you will. Channel repertoire is the viewing habits of consumers as they pertain to how many channels out of available options are watched. So that's the idea that, as a consumer, you have a limited number of channels that are kind of your go-to channels, the ones that you will check in and watch on a regular basis. And that might be 7 or 8 or 10 channels that you would normally watch out of how many different channels that your cable or satellite operator provides to you. Generally, the average consumer watches TV from 8 different channels regularly and may watch content from 15 channels for at least 1 hour each week. And about 1/2 of viewers, and mostly women fall into this category, choose in advance the programs they will watch. Others, they tend to channel surf. So it's that difference in demographics between those that have their particular programs as opposed to those that just kind of cruise up and down the dial and see what happens to be on. Some people prefer a limited number of choices. Broadcast scheduling, as a consequence of compatibility strategies and a tendency toward habit formation, pre-selects a varied sequence of listening and viewing experiences skillfully adapted to the desires and deeds of a target audience. So all of this playing into habit formation, in that you've got your certain set of channels or your certain programs that you like to watch, and you're kind of in that mode. You do the same thing on whether it's a daily basis or a weekly basis or whatever it is. And programmers are going to try to build its programming schedule in such a way that if you do change your viewing habits, you change your viewing habits to the advantage of that particular media outlet. So, elements of programming. We've talked about compatibility. We've talked about habit formation. Here's the third group, control of audience flow. Now, audience flow, as we're talking about it here, is the concept of the next program in a sequence that captures the attention of the viewer of the previous program. So if there is a show that attracts a certain demographic on at 8 o'clock in the evening, then they're going to try to keep that 8 o'clock audience staying tuned in for the 8:30 show and for the 9 o'clock show. That's one way to try to maintain the audience flow that you already have. Another way to try to control audience flow is through a concept called counter programming. With counter programming, you are scheduling programs with differing appeals against each other. So if you are programming for a particular network and your competitor is programming sitcoms during a particular time slot, you may decide that instead of going after the sitcom audience, you're going to go for the drama audience. So you may program a drama as a counter programming measure to those that do not want to watch sitcoms. So you would be attracting an audience that other network would not attract. Tuning inertia. Tuning inertia is the idea that people tend to leave the channel selector alone unless stimulated into action by some forceful reason for change. This used to be more of a thing prior to the remote control and prior to there being a plethora of different channels available out there to watch. When it was just the big three, CBS, ABC, NBC, it was not unusual for households to tune into one particular channel and leave that channel on for the entire evening. Now, that still happens to a certain extent if a station programs its channel well for its audience, but because there is so much competition out there and it is so easy to change the dial now, to try to maintain that tuning inertia is going to be a significant challenge to the programmer. Speaking of the remote control, here's some of the ways that tuning inertia gets interrupted by these different activities: grazing, flipping, zapping, and zipping. Grazing is the idea of hunting up and down the dial. You know, what's on channel 46, what's on channel 47, 48, on and on and on. Flipping, the idea of going back and forth between two channels. Maybe there's two shows you want to watch at the same time that kind of sort of interest you. Many people will do this. If a commercial comes on for program A, they'll flip the program B. And they'll flip there until program A comes back on or until program B starts showing commercials and that sort of thing. Zapping, changing the channel to avoid commercials. So kind of in combination with flipping, except you may not go back to that original channel. And zipping, this would be popular with the DVR crowd and the on-demand crowd, fast forwarding through unwanted content, especially with commercials in particular. So you can kind of see that there's a challenge here for the programmer that is trying to woo the advertiser to purchase airtime on their station. If we are actively trying to avoid commercials. So, one of the ongoing battles in the broadcast industry. Some formats aim to not keep audiences continuously tuned in, but at getting them to constantly return. So, a good example of this would be the Weather Channel. They promote their weather on the 8s. So if you want to get an updated weather forecast, you know you can tune in at 8 minutes past the hour, 18 minutes past the hour, 28 minutes past the hour, and come in and watch that local forecast. So there's going to be a strategy there for getting those ratings and numbers of people to tune in those particular ways. 24-hour news channels like CNN Headline News, where they have a particular news wheel and clock that they follow from hour to hour to hour. People are going to get pretty familiar with what types of content is going to be on at what point in the hour, and people will return to watch that particular content on a regular basis. So, now the fourth element of programming: conservation of program resources. Conservation of program resources. Radio and TV notoriously burn up program materials at a high rate. There is 24 hours in a day, and as we tend to have 24-hour TV and radio stations, that means that content always has to be on. And it can be a challenge to make sure that you are filling your airwaves with audio and video for all of those hours. A high percentage of programming consists of repeats of the same items. And a few ways that they do this. There's repurposing. Shows can be repurposed by being rerun, or they could be reused on sister networks or digital platforms. There's certain shows that at times NBC will air the program first, and then the show will get another airing on the USA Network, which is a co-owned entity. And there's several examples of that sort of thing happening. Frugality must be practiced at every level and in every aspect of programming. And this is how you wind up seeing best of programs, or you might see flashbacks to content from a previous broadcast. You might get broken up news segments, encores. They will try to package those things in various different ways in order to be able to reuse content so they don't have to come up with something brand new on a consistent basis. The idea of the double run. The double run is playing the same episode of a program at two different times in one day. This is popular with cable networks. Discovery Channel in particular is really good at this, where they will promote a show that runs on a particular night at 8 o'clock, and they will run the exact same episode of that program at 11 o'clock later that evening. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is this repurposing of content to be able to fill their time slots. And the other is if you recognize that a show airs at 8 o'clock here on the East Coast, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and then it airs again at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock happens to be 8 p.m. Pacific Time. So they can promo that a show is running at 8 p.m. both on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and they're able to run that show. And the side effect is that on the East Coast, we get that same program again at 11 p.m. Some broadcast networks plan repeats of primetime shows, giving viewers choice of when to watch a show. We've talked about Primetime Saturday earlier on. So it's a way to showcase content that may have run earlier in the week and give people another opportunity to watch that content and to put it into a particular type of packaging. And this is kind of a more strategic way of doing stripping of programs, where you're stripping them by genre as opposed to stripping a show in particular. A major aspect of the programmer's job consists of devising ingenious ways to get the maximum mileage out of each program item. Conservation of resources, reduce, reuse, recycle. A professional programmer has to plan simultaneously for all media as well as for the attrition that sets in. So you've got the acquiring of the content and then using that content to your best advantage and getting the most bang for your buck, honestly. Okay, so we have talked about compatibility. We've talked about habit formation. We've talked about the control of audience flow. And we've talked about the conservation of program resources. Here's the fifth element: breadth of appeal. The top-rated primetime program, that should say primetime program, draws 10 to 15% of the available audience. So if we're taking a look at the entire population of the country, 325 million or so, to get 32 million out of 325 million is considered pretty daggone good. All right. One way to kind of read the ratings. What does a 10 rating mean? It means that about 10 million households are tuned in to a particular program. And we'll talk more about ratings as we go along in the course. All right, let's talk now about a model of programming. Now, what you're going to see on your screen is a diagram from your textbook, and this is what is considered to be a basic 4-part programming model. You can almost think of it as an equation where you've got the different elements of what it takes for broadcast programming to happen, and thinking about how those things come together. So the ultimate goal is to try to get as good of an audience size as you can with your content that is going to appeal to advertisers to want to purchase airtime on your station. So with that in mind, you've got the combinations of the programming process: selection, scheduling, and promotion. And the amount of emphasis and time that you put into those 3 particular things is going to result in a particular audience size. And the strategy is to try to combine those things in such a way that you can get the maximum audience size, either for your general audience, if that's what you're going for, or your particular demographic that you are seeking out. Now, within those 3 different elements, the selection, the scheduling, and the promotion, you have within that always continually doing evaluation. You're evaluating each of those elements to determine how much of those things that you are doing in consultation with each other. Should you focus more or less on the selection of your content? Should you focus more or less on the promotion of your content? And trying to figure out what exactly the best formula combination is to reach your ultimate audience size goal. Some proportional influence on an audience is, here's some strategies here. Competition has boosted the importance of promotion and diminished the salience of scheduling, especially for new programs and services. So this is why, again, you tend to see promotional pieces instead of advertising during all available advertising avails as you're watching a particular network or cable channel, because, again, the networks want you to know the offerings that they have available. They want you to know when they are on, and they want to encourage you to tune in. And it is important for them to try to reach out to you and to convince you to be tuned in so that you contribute to their ratings numbers and help them to beat the competition. Now, as we talk about this in terms of equations, it makes it kind of seem like there's a science to it, and there is, but programming is also as much an art as it is a science. There's not going to be a steadfast formula as to how this all works out, because culture changes, because the availability of content changes, because demographics and cultural behaviorals are going to be different from market to market to market. So there's not going to be a simple, here's how you plug it in. You kind of have to finesse, and you kind of have to feel, and you have to evaluate, and you have to adjust. And that's the artistic part of the programming world. Now, some factors in the selection of content. You have audience habits. What's the audience looking for? You have the cost. How much is it going to cost? And comparing that with what advertisers are willing to pay to be associated with that content. So you're looking at the profitability standpoint there. You're looking at compatibility. Is the content that you're considering selecting compatible with the branding of your station, with the audience demographic that you're going for at the particular time that that program is going to air? You've got talent availability, the quality of the talent, whether talent can perform effectively the content that's being produced. You've got differentiation. How unique is the content that's available? Trendiness. Is it something that's in vogue with the current desires of the audience? And novelty. How different is it? How unique is it? Is it something that is going to really capture attention on the content's own merit? All these things factor into the selection of content. Now, some factors in the scheduling of content. You have all these different terms here that we are going to we're going to talk about some of these as we go through. But you have hammocking, you have blocking, you have compatibility. Compatibility with schedule is the content going to be appropriate for the time slot that it's in. You've got certain legal issues there, and then just certain logistics in terms of where your audience is at and if they're available. You've got ranking. How highly ranked is the show? How highly ranked is the time slot that's available? Inherited viewing. Where's your audience at? Are you going to be able to retain that audience with this particular content? Competition. What are the other folks doing? What are they airing? If you're airing stuff that's too similar, or it's a similar type of content to the point where do you think yours is going to be more popular with the particular audience that desires that content as opposed to what the competition is airing? Or are you going to go in a completely different direction? Now, let's define a couple of these terms. Hammocking is a technique in which new or unpopular programs are scheduled between two popular ones in hopes that the viewers will watch it. So if you've got a top-rated show at 8 p.m., another top-rated show at 9 p.m., you might put a lesser popular show or a brand new show at 8:30 in hopes of boosting the ratings based on the fact that you've got these highly rated shows on either side of it. Blocking is the idea of scheduling similar TV shows back to back to back. Crime Time Saturday, good example of that. Drama show, followed by drama show, followed by drama show. In radio, the selection of songs and the content and placement of things like news stories are going to be strategic as well. So, in most cases, you don't have radio stations just playing a song at random simply because it's within their playlist and it's what's in the automation system. The programmer is going to schedule certain types of songs in certain ways on a clock that is going to hopefully create a listening audience that will remain with that station. In most music stations, that's going to be a mix of new music with popular favorites, and knowing the best ratio of how much new music to air versus classics and that sort of thing. Websites schedule by topic, genre, or alphabetical order, so it's more about the ease of finding the content that the consumer is looking for. Promotion factors. These are all different things to keep in mind when it comes to promoting your content. There's clutter. How much stuff is surrounding the promotional material? How much information are you trying to put out in the promotional material? Are you trying to do too much at one time, or is it just bland noise that you're putting out there as opposed to really creating kind of this salivating moment in the consumer that is taking in the promotional piece? There's location. When do you broadcast the promotional content? Generally, you're going to see promos either immediately after a program segment ends or immediately before the new program segment ends, in hopes that the promotional material is going to catch more eyeballs. Frequency. How often do you air the promotion? You can't just expect to run something once or twice and expect a huge audience to flood in. Construction. How is the promo put together? Distance. You don't want to consistently promote material one right after another. You also don't want the promos to air too far apart from each other or too far apart from the point that the content that you're promoting is actually going to air. And then familiarity. It's kind of that idea of branding using your promotional material. Are you creating promos that are eye-catching, ear-catching, that people recognize the branding of what it is that you're trying to promote, and it creates an impression with the audience member? Some other considerations here as it comes to clutter. Does the promo get lost among other content? The location of the promo. Again, when does it run? Does it run during commercials, within programming? That can happen as well. Frequency and distance. How often is the promo heard? And then familiarity and construction both have to do with branding. So we've selected the content, we've scheduled the content, we've promoted the content. Now, let's take a look at some of the factors in evaluating content. Tolerance levels. Is the content tolerated? Has the promotion been tolerated? The times that it airs. All those things. Are those things that are acceptable to your audience? Audience share. How many people are tuning in compared to how many people are tuning into other types of content? Genre trends. What's happening with other comedies that are currently on the air? Other dramas that are currently on the air? How well is that particular type of programming doing overall in the current culture? Stock value. That is going to deal with not just the financial aspect of things, but the overall reputation of the particular media outlet, the particular programming, almost kind of a credibility sort of thing in terms of the actual worth of the content in the mind of the consumer. Technology. How are people consuming the content? Are there more people watching online? Is online getting in the way of other means of consuming the content? How much interaction is there between the content and the consumer? All questions to ask there. And design styles, the actual logistics of the content itself. How is it put together? Is it sending the message that it wants to send to the audience it wants to reach in the way that the audience wants to reach it? What is your message? Who is your audience? So all these things are constantly being looked at in many different angles, in many different ways, when it comes to the evaluation of how you are doing at programming your station. Some other factors in evaluation include competition. What are the other guys doing? Audience behavior and lifestyle. So we're looking at demographics. We're looking at the regional culture. A program may do well in the South that doesn't do as well in the Northeast, and vice versa. What sort of fads or trends are out there at that particular moment? What is popular just in general, even outside media? So you can see with all these different things and many more that we haven't been able to mention, that evaluation is a changing, ongoing process. It can be very fickle, and it can be very different from day to day, let alone week to week, month to month, definitely from season to season. So that is this portion of the notes. We've got just one more section to go. We'll start looking at sections 7 and 8 with part D of the video.